So I'm just back from playing football and I'm here to tell you about the Yalta conference today. We're going to focus on the Yalta and Potsdam. Crucial events at the start of the Cold War and so likely to come up on your exam. So Yalta was a little bit happier than the Potsdam conference, which was to come later. It included Churchill, who you'll probably have heard of, Roosevelt, who you should have heard of doing the United States module, and Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, which you could also hear me calling the USSR, which is what it can be known for short. And there were a number of things that they agreed on, which is why it's kind of different to Potsdam. One of the things they agreed on was setting up the United Nations, which was a body which was designed to stop there being future wars, effectively. They also agreed that Germany needed occupying. So they decided to divide Germany into four. France would control a part, Britain, America and the Soviet Union would control a part as well. But Berlin was in the Soviet zone. And just like London, Berlin is the most wealthy part of Germany. It was and it is. So if they were dividing up a country like that, it would be a bit unfair to have the capital city in one area. So not only did they divide Germany into four, they divided Berlin into four, even though it was in the Soviet zone. And that was all agreed, fair enough. It was also agreed that because the Soviet Union had lost 26 to 27 million dead, that's not wounded, that's dead, compared to less than 1 million for the British and the Americans combined, and the damage as well was massive, way worse in the Soviet Union. It was agreed that the reparations they got from Germany, reparations a bit like compensation, the reparations they got from Germany, the Soviet Union would get their fair share. They would get more than the other nations. They also agreed that the Soviet Union would join in the war against Japan because the Yalta Conference, Germany was kind of, not far off surrender when they came to that. And that's why they held a conference, by the way. And they agreed that they would hunt down Nazi criminals because, of course, as they were going across Europe, they uncovered the concentration camps. The thing that they disagreed on was Poland. Poland had been divided between the Nazis and the Soviet Union in a pact that Hitler and Stalin had made just before the Second World War broke out. Now, the Soviet Union was stabbed in the back by Hitler, and Hitler attacked and invaded the Soviet Union despite the agreement they'd made over Poland a couple of years previous. Stalin, and actually if you know anything about the Second World War, you might be aware that the reason Britain and France declared war on Germany was because Germany invaded Poland. Soviet Union had as well, but we didn't declare war on them. After the war, the Soviet Union wanted to maintain the part of Poland that they'd been given. So they wanted to take Poland, half of Poland nearly, but they thought, that's not fair on the Poles, we agree that, so we'll give Poland parts of Germany. So effectively, Poland was like that. The Soviet Union were going to take some, and then they were going to take some from Germany. So Poland was to move across the map. And there was not much that anybody could do about that, really, except for to give in to Stalin, because Stalin occupied all of Eastern Europe. As they'd pushed the Nazis back across Europe, they'd occupied it. So these poor people in Eastern Europe had suffered occupation by the Nazis, and now they were suffering occupation by the Soviet Union. And so although they disagreed about Poland, the Soviet Union kind of got his own way, really, in the end. One of the things that was agreed on, and it was really vague, was that the Soviet Union could have a sphere of influence in the East. What does that mean? Well, it's hard for me to tell you, because nobody at the time really knew what that means, or meant. It boils down to this buffer zone, which I talked to you about in lessons. The Soviet Union had been invaded twice by Germany in less than 50 years, and the Soviet Union were a little bit paranoid, rightly so probably, that they might get invaded again. So they wanted this zone in Eastern Europe of friendly governments towards the Soviet Union where they could influence that sort of area. And this is the zone of influence, or sphere of influence, that was agreed upon. And something that isn't in the textbook, which I'm aware of from my own knowledge, all of the big three agreed to free elections across all of Europe from the countries that had been liberated from the Nazis. Now, they agreed to that. The problem was the Soviet Union wanted friendly governments in Eastern Europe, and the countries in Eastern Europe weren't necessarily particularly, well, they didn't look positively on the Soviet Union because there's a lot of history there between those countries. So given the choice in an election, they weren't likely to vote communist or for anybody who would support the Soviet Union. So Stalin had agreed to free elections, but if he held free elections, he wouldn't get his sphere of influence and those friendly governments and that buffer zone. And actually Stalin had no intentions of holding free elections. To him, to the communists, free elections meant you can vote for anyone you like. Anyone at all, so long as they were communist. And this is because they thought communists are the only people who represent the people. That's their logic. Whereas, of course, to the West, to the capitalists, to people like us, free elections mean you can vote for anyone. So that was later to be something that was thrown at the Soviets because they'd agreed to it and they never carried that through. So yeah, Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, they were allies. The Nazis still hadn't been defeated. They made some agreements. There was a bit of a disagreement over Poland. They made plenty of agreements over other things. The Soviet Union wanted more out of it, and they were kind of entitled to it because they'd suffered more, and everyone really agreed to that. So at the Yalta conference, things went fairly swimmingly, definitely compared to the Potsdam conference. Just looking at the exam questions before I switch off to make sure I've covered everything. Decisions about Germany, yeah, they'd be divided. Berlin be divided, Germany divided, the Nazi war criminals will be hunted down. Those are the things that you need to know for that. Yeah, I think that's that. So that's the Yalta conference.